Removing scrap metal from your island can appear daunting, but it is not a difficult task. Nearly everything metal is recyclable, and for every recyclable metal, there is a way of processing. In this video, skilled technicians from Sims Pacific Metal will walk you through the basics of scrap metal processing.
Today we're at Sims Metal's non-ferrous processing plant in Sydney. The basic function of this plant here in Sydney is the processing and sorting of non-ferrous materials to be packaged for smelters all around the world. The difference between ferrous and non-ferrous metals is pretty simple. It's basically ferrous will stick with a magnet as seen, whereas non-ferrous I'll explain with a piece of aluminium where it won't stick at all. So the magnet will just fall down, whereas ferrous will always stick to it. Because scrap metal can come in various shapes and sizes, it can be often difficult to tell the difference between ferrous and non-ferrous. If you're unsure, it is always best to get your magnet out to test. And as such, I found a steel amongst the aluminium.
The main types of non-ferrous metals are lead, aluminium, copper, radiators, brass, stainless steel, zinc, batteries.
At a metal recycling facility, it's important to keep all grades of non-ferrous metals separated in bays, as you can see behind me here. It's not the size of the plant that we're operating in that's important, it's about the segregation of the metals. Obviously on an island you would be working in a lot smaller facilities than what we are here. What is important is to separate the non-ferrous grades such as aluminium, copper, stainless steel, brass, radiators, lead, batteries and zinc. At Sims Metal, we do accept non-ferrous which has been mixed. When I say mixed, it might have aluminium, copper, etc. all together. However, if you do this, you can expect a lower return than if you were to separate each individual commodity. Some forms of non-ferrous metals may have contamination on them which may not be worth your while taking them off, such as a few of the items I have in front of me here now. This brass valve has a steel top which we can accept it in its form. It is worth more value if the steel is taken off, but we can accept it. Also, we have a piece of aluminium here with steel hanging out of it. We can accept it in its form that it is, however it does have a high value if the steel is removed. And just like again, another piece of brass which has a plastic top on it, we can accept in its form, although it does have a higher return if it has been removed. Another form of copper we accept at Sims Metal is insulated copper wire. This is fine copper wire which is covered with either a PVC plastic or rubber covering. You don't need to take the PVC or rubber off the copper, as we can do that here ourselves. Here at Sims Metal, we also recycle plastic bumper bars off automotive vehicles.
Here we are today at a ferrous processing plant of Sims Metal. The shredder behind us processes light gauge material of ferrous nature, which consists of fridges, stoves, washing machine, light gauge sheet metal.
The main types of light gauge ferrous metals are cars, white goods like fridges, washing machines, electric and gas stoves, bicycles, motorbikes, roof sheeting and sheeting offcuts.
Islands should actually sort their ferrous material into 3 grades. The light gauge material should be kept separate from the car bodies. The light gauge material should also be kept separate from the heavy gauge material. We are here at a ferrous heavy gauge processing plant. Here we actually oxy-cut material into shorter units, or we put material through this large shear which you can see behind me.
The main types of heavy gauge ferrous metals are derelict construction machines like bulldozers, drag lines, cranes, containers, shipwrecks and stranded barges, old construction steel like girders, tanks, pipes and plates, engine blocks and parts, certain non-magnetic castings and caterpillar tracks.
It is important to separate the light gauge from the heavy gauge material, basically because the heavy gauge is more valuable and they both require different types of processing.
To remove light gauge scrap from your island will mostly require the expedition of a mobile baler to compress the metal into compact units, which can be then put into containers for re-exportation. Before a car is baled, you must remove the fuel tanks or hole them, remove LPG and CNG tanks, remove the batteries, drain the engine and transmission of its oil, remove all rubbish. Heavy gauge ferrous metals can be oxy-cut into smaller units around 1 metre by half a metre and later transported to containers. Batteries must be stacked into 2 layers only, with cardboard or thin timber between each layer, strapped horizontally and vertically twice on each layer, then shrink wrapped. For exportation you must abide by the Basel Convention, so your government would need to approve the exportation of these batteries and the receiving government must approve to import them. This may take months, but it's worth the wait. IH's Scrap can offer your island logistical, technical and organisational support. Before you start, we will send you a metal expert who will answer your questions like, how are various items processed?
Like fridges with this kind of
no, that's the fridges and light gauge material is all can be pressed together. The reason the cars are normally kept separate is because they do contain tanks and gas cylinders. We normally check them first. But white goods and corrugated iron, flashing, together is not a problem at all.
How much scrap is there on your island?
I think with the overall total of the car bodies, the light gauge material and the heavy steel, in this area you're probably looking at about 265 tonnes. You give or take 20 tonne either way depending on what comes out of the whole job. But it's very mixed, but it's I think the volumes are there.
And from what you've seen on the rest of the island?
Up to 35 tonne of car bodies and light gauge material that's still to be brought in, and probably up to 30 to 40 tonne of heavy material around the workshops and a few other places. So you probably, to be safe, you'd be looking around the 300 to 320 tonne in total for the whole job, I'd say. Yeah.
How to get scrap out of difficult spots?
This is probably a common thing to see around the place. Scrap steel being pushed into land reclamation. It's always hard to get out once it's in there. It'd have to be dragged out with a dozer. It's mingled right through all the rocks here. There is some that's accessible, some of it is buried, but some could be removed. There's probably about 6 to 8 tonne in weight in this piece of equipment. It'd have to be either dragged up by a bulldozer on safe ground to cut, or lifted out with a crane. I don't think there's enough access for a crane, but it can be done.
What to do with metal in your landfill?
In regards to the scrap metal that's lying around, what do you suggest that we can do with it now?
I think the best way would be to access whatever's accessible is to remove it. In the long term, it's going to supply you with a lot more landfill area and create a bit of revenue for your first clean-up program. In your new project, a segregation area for the different types of metal rather than having it mixed through the landfill.
Can the baler be offloaded on your island?
That's 3 metres. Just want to move along a bit further. It's another 3. That's 10 metres inside, which will accommodate the baler without a problem, providing the width is okay. The height's obviously, it's open, so we won't have a trouble with the height. So if we can just get a measurement along the front. We have 3 metres inside measurement, which will be okay. It should fit.
Do you have the infrastructure and all the equipment you need?
We have a 30-tonne mobile crane, which is out at the moment in one of the projects, and a hired mounted Isuzu truck, 8 wheel, 12 wheel.
Yeah, 12 wheels.
Yeah, and a Mack transporter low loader truck on the other side there, and 3 forklifts, one 10-tonne, one 6-tonne, and that 3D ex-Army, ex-US Navy little 3-tonne capacity.
Prime mover, it's just a standard type towing prime mover. What size pin do we have? Turntable pin access.
That I can't tell you. We've got the low. What do you got?
It'll just be to be able to tow the compactor from the wharf to the site.
You got the turntable.
It's a turntable, yes. Yeah.
I'll have to check on that.
Okay. It should be compatible, but just
most of them are, aren't they? Really?
Just the airlines and kingpin sizes are the only issues we have. Yeah, and providing it'll tow 15 tonne up at the from the wharf area.
Do you have all you need to oxycut?
We only got that type cutting equipment at the moment.
Just the oxyacetylene.
Long.
Do you use acetylene or handy gas?
We've got the propane. We can use propane.
Yeah, propane's probably more efficient and a lot hotter cutting flame for doing chassis and things in that manner. Yeah.
And we got the tips. And what are the tips?
Yes, but I think we need extended cutting
handle.
Yeah.
Yeah, Harris.
So you can,
yeah.
You know.
Harris torch, probably about 4 foot long. They're a lot easier to work with.
Yeah.
Yep.
Will that do for where's?
That will do. It'll do the
Will
work.
that do the job?
It'll do the job without a problem. But using acetylene compared to handy gas is a lot more expensive. Handy gas, you can bring a large cylinder over and probably outrun the life of that bottle by 10 times, and it could half the price.
How long does it take to oxycut something?
We have 3 different. These consist of 3 different metals. We've got the light gauge body. We have the heavy steel chassis and diffs and springs, and we also have a cast iron engine. So the cab would have to be removed off of the chassis. Then the chassis cut into probably 4 pieces to 5 pieces of this length, and the springs taken off and the axles cut in half. So there'd be a good 3 to 4 hours work to process that ready for taking off of the island. A complete container would take approximately an hour to cut down for transport. Over the gauge.
How long will the operation take?
But it can.
And how much baling do you think is involved?
He'd have about 12 days baling, 12 days solid baling, and he could then concentrate on maybe cutting up some of the heavy material with oxy and the general final cleanup, I suppose, to pick up all the small material.
Working with scrap metal can be dangerous and requires some vital precautions to be taken. Not all items can be processed.
Unfortunately, there is a risk associated with buying scrap metal. Behind me is a list of our prohibited goods, which I'll run through them with you. Flammable liquids, which can take the form of any type of cylinder which contains fuel. Pressure vessels, which are the likes of any gas bottles, which can cause explosions. Corrosive materials, except for acids in lead-acid batteries. Asbestos, which can be in common form in roofing. Any type of explosive. Non-metallic refuse, which is the likes of tyres, cardboard, concrete, etc. Any poisonous material or radioactive material.
Dangerous items, as you have seen and as follows, must be kept well segregated from all other scrap metal to be processed separately.
This is an old bitumen tank using for storing bitumen for roadworks. A lot of times they contain a residue in the bottom of bitumen which can ignite if it was to be oxy-cut. This is very old and deteriorated, the material is very dry. I don't think it would cause any danger for any sort of processing. But if it was to be liquid bitumen, we'd have a big fire in our hands if it did happen. Fire extinguishers, another hazard for us. As we know, they are a compressed cylinder. They hold fluids, other materials. They're a very high danger in pressing. If they go into a machine and are compacted, we could cause an explosion. If they're missed in the machine and go to our mill where the material is shredded up, it can cause a massive explosion and fire. This and gas tanks in vehicles and fuel tanks can be killers, so we have to be very careful with them. These cylinders are what we would class as a disaster in our industry. If they were to find their way inside of a cargo or a bailed car or vehicle and sent to a mill for processing, the explosion would be horrendous. Even as old as they are, they can still hold gas for a number of years. This is a similar problem that we have with the bitumen tank that we showed earlier. They're a fuel tank, above ground or in-ground fuel tank. If these were to be oxy-cut with any oils, then we'd have a potential bomb on our hands, so somebody could get injured or a drastic fire occur. A lot of these have been laying around for a long time, have had water through them due to rain and ventilation. They are sometimes safe. They are still a very risky piece of plant to cut. Very strict procedures have to be taken to cut them properly. We would normally put these on top of a load, send them back to the mill to be processed in a safe manner.
IH's scrap program advocates occupational health and safety standards of the highest Australian practice. Before you start your scrap metal operation, IH and SIMS provides training in important aspects of personal and equipment safety.
Protective clothing is a big issue that we cannot send workers onto a site unless they are completely supplied with the right amount of protective clothing.
Normal protective clothing. Steel-capped boots, overalls, gloves, goggles, fluorescent vest, hard hat, ear protection for noisy equipment.
Most of the injuries in the way of eye injuries and burns are from oxy-cutting. A lot of people whinge and carry on about having to wear all the heavy coats and the gloves and the spats. But I've worked in areas in Australia from where the temperature ranges from -2 in the morning to 45 degrees in the afternoon, and being rugged up, you aren't all that hot. So you seem to stay fairly cool because you don't have the elements of the sun beating on your skin. But I'd rather be rugged up and feeling hot during the day than be burnt and sitting in a hospital with 3rd-degree burn.
Oxy-cutting protective clothing. Steel-capped boots, leather spats, leather or thick woolen protective clothing, long-length leather gloves, moulded goggles, hard hat, ear protection.
The Australian standards are very, very complex, and for that reason that you should not be able to have an incident if we follow the procedure properly.
IH also provides assistance with shipping, exporting and environmental draft legislation to help ensure sustainability. It is the role of your island to organise an implementing committee, centralise the scrap in a safe and flat workable area, oxycut heavy metals, load into containers, load containers onto the ship. When the metal leaves your island, it will most likely be fumigated on arrival at its destination port. You can handle this yourself, or Sims can do it for you. Finally, your scrap arrives at a Sims reprocessing facility.
All ferrous and non-ferrous metals are weighed on a weighbridge like this one. We do this so that the customer and Sims Metal will understand how much we are receiving or how much material is actually exiting the yard.
It's a really good idea, getting rid of all that metal and stuff, because it's also piling up and it's increasing the pollution for us.
I think you're doing a good job there in removing all those metals here.
The IH partnership has been was first started off in Funafuti with shopping bags, getting rid of plastic bags. We played a very, very small part in that, but I guess that introduced us to the organisation. This has certainly been a much bigger involvement with them, and I mean, what I like about it is they're totally committed to the cause and totally committed to cleaning up the Pacific. And if that's what their strategy is long term, then we're right behind it.
Very, very pleased with the way that IH has provided assistance to us for this project, and we're looking forward to cooperating with them with further projects on waste management into the future.
Good job, yeah.